The phone rang at 12:47 in the morning. Bruce Springsteen had been asleep for maybe 2 hours. Not a deep sleep, the kind of light provisional sleep that comes when the day has been full and the mind has not yet finished with it, when you drift under rather than descend. He was in his house in New Jersey, and the room was dark, and the phone was ringing with the particular insistence of a phone that has been ringing for more than one cycle, that is moved from first ring to second ring to third and is working on the fourth. He picked it up. The voice on the other end said, "Bruce, it's Michael. I'm sorry to call so late." There was exactly one Michael who would call at 12:47 in the morning and open with an apology that was not entirely an apology, that was phrased like an apology but carried in its tone the quality of someone who has something urgent to say and has decided that the urgency justifies the hour, who is sorry for the inconvenience in the way that people are sorry for things they would do again under the same circumstances. Bruce said, "Michael." Michael Jackson said, "I need you to come to my house. Tonight, if you can. Tomorrow at the latest. I'm putting something together and I need your help and I need it now, and I don't have time to explain everything on the phone." Bruce sat up. He was 35 years old. The Born in the USA album had been out for 7 months and had sold 8 million copies and was not done selling. He had been on tour for most of those 7 months, playing stadiums, and had come off the road recently enough that his body had not entirely recalibrated to the rhythms of a life that was not touring. He was tired in the specific accumulated way of someone who has been performing for large crowds at maximum intensity for an extended period and has not yet recovered the reserves. He said, "What is it?" Michael said, "Africa. There are people dying, and nobody is paying attention, and I've been talking to Quincy, and we have an idea for a song and a recording session, and we need the right people in the room. I need your voice. I need what you do. Will you come?" The Africa that Michael Jackson was referring to was Ethiopia in January 1985, which was in the middle of a famine that had been building for 2 years, and that had begun in the preceding months to receive the kind of international attention that famines receive when the images are sufficiently terrible and the journalists have gotten there in sufficient numbers. The numbers were terrible. The images were terrible. The situation was what the situation was, which was a catastrophe of the kind that human beings create through the accumulation of drought and failed governance and deliberate political indifference, and that, in this case, was killing people at a rate that the international relief organizations were struggling to keep up with. Michael Jackson had been thinking about it for months. The thinking had led to conversations with Quincy Jones, who had produced Thriller, and who had produced Michael's music before Thriller, and who was therefore the person Michael called when the thinking became a plan that required someone to understand how to turn an idea into a recording. The conversations had led to a song written by Michael Jackson and Lionel Richie called "We Are the World," which was completed in draft form, but not yet recorded, which existed on paper and in Michael's head and in Quincy's arrangements, but had not yet been made real in the way that songs become real, which is when they are played by musicians and sung by voices in a room. Michael wanted the best voices in America in that room. He had been making calls for weeks, assembling the people he wanted, and the list was already huge and was going to be more enormous before it was done. He had been talking to Diana Ross and Stevie Wonder and Kenny Rogers and Cyndi Lauper and Willie Nelson and Tina Turner and Ray Charles, and people whose names added together constituted something close to the full spectrum of American popular music across 50 years of its history. He wanted Bruce Springsteen. He had wanted Bruce for a reason that was specific and that he articulated in the call that night with the directness of someone who has thought about it carefully and is not interested in persuading through flattery but through accuracy. He said, "You are what working people in this country sound like when they're telling the truth. That's what this song needs. It needs the truth. It needs people who can sing it without making it smaller than it is." Bruce was quiet for a moment. He was sitting on the edge of the bed in the dark, with the phone against his ear, and the room was the specific quiet of a house in New Jersey at 1 in the morning, which is a particular quiet that carries in it the weight of all the people who are asleep within it and around it, the quiet of ordinary life proceeding in ordinary time. He thought about what Michael had said. He thought about it the way he thought about things that mattered, which was fully, without the deflection of other considerations, with the whole of his attention brought to bear on the question, rather than spread across the adjacent questions of scheduling and logistics, and the practical costs of saying yes. He said, "When?" Michael said, "The 28th. We're recording at A&M Studios in Hollywood, after the American Music Awards. Everyone is going to be in town for the awards, and we're doing the session in the same night, so nobody has to arrange separate travel. We need you there by midnight after the show." Bruce said, "I'll be there." Michael said, "Thank you, Bruce, I mean it." Bruce said, "I know. Get some sleep." Michael said, "I'll sleep after the 28th. He hung up. Bruce sat in the dark for a moment. Then he lay back down, and the room was quiet again, and the phone was on the nightstand, and whatever had been in his mind before the call had been replaced by the specific weight of a commitment made in the dark, of a yes that was already real, and now had to be honored. He was not, in the days that followed, someone who talked about the call, or about the upcoming session with the expansiveness of someone who understood, in advance, what it was going to become. He mentioned it to a few people close to him, in the matter-of-fact way of someone scheduling an appointment, rather than anticipating a historic occasion. He did not think of it as a historic occasion. He thought of it as the thing Michael had described on the phone, a song about people dying that needed the right voices in the room. The 28th was a Tuesday. The American Music Awards took place at the Shrine Auditorium in Los Angeles, and the performers and presenters and nominees assembled, and the evening proceeded with the particular organized chaos of a major awards show. And at some point after the ceremony, the same people who had been in formal wear at the Shrine Auditorium began arriving at A&M Studios on North La Brea Avenue, where the setup had been going on since early morning, and where Quincy Jones and a production team that had been working for weeks had organized the space for a recording session unlike any that had been attempted in the history of American popular music. Bruce Springsteen arrived at the studio after midnight. He was wearing what he was wearing, jeans and a jacket, his road clothes, the clothes of someone who has not spent the evening at an awards show, but has driven from wherever he was to wherever he needed to be, which was here. He walked in and the room was full. Not full in the sense of crowded, full in the sense of containing people who filled it by their presence, who brought with them the accumulated weight of their careers and their voices and their specific individual histories in American music. Stevie Wonder was at the piano, talking to someone in the animated, gesturing way that Stevie Wonder talked when he was engaged with a musical idea. Ray Charles was in a chair nearby, head slightly tilted, listening to something that may not have been audible to the other people in the room, or may have been the interior sound of a musician, who is always, in some part of himself, listening to music. Diana Ross, Kenny Rogers, whose voice had been one of the most commercially successful voices in American country music for 20 years, and who stood in the room with the specific ease of someone who has been in many rooms and has learned to be comfortable in all of them. Cyndi Lauper in the corner, with her specific quality of being entirely herself, regardless of what room she was in, the quality of someone who has decided, and has not undecided, that her individuality is not a negotiable part of her public identity. Willie Nelson, with his guitar and his braids, and his 61 years of knowing exactly what music required from the person making it. Harry Belafonte was there, Dionne Warwick, Huey Lewis, Paul Simon, Smokey Robinson, Bob Dylan, whose presence in the room had its own specific weight, the weight of someone who had changed American music twice and was therefore not at the beginning of anything, but was present, which was the thing that was being asked of everyone. Bruce moved through the room the way he moved through rooms, without ceremony, with the easy directness of someone who is not performing arrival, who is simply arriving. He found Michael Jackson, in person, in the context of the A&M Studios session, was a different thing from Michael Jackson as the public understood him, which was as the most famous entertainer in the world, as Thriller, as the moonwalk and the red jacket and the glove. He was 26 years old. He was in his element, which was not the stage, but the recording. Not the performance, but the making. The specific environment of a studio, where the music was still being assembled, where the decisions about how it would sound were still being made, where the person who cared most about the outcome was still in control of the process, in the way that creative people are in control of processes that they have initiated and that have not yet become larger than them. He greeted Bruce with a warmth that had nothing performative in it. The warmth of someone who had needed a specific thing, had called the specific person who could provide it, and had received the yes. He said, "Thank you for coming. I know you didn't have to." Bruce said, "You told me what it was for." Michael said, "Yes." They were assigned positions. The session was organized the way Quincy Jones organized things, which was with the comprehensive prior planning that makes a thing seem to flow effortlessly in execution. Positions marked on the floor, microphone levels preset, the arrangement laid out so that the musicians and vocalists could move through the song without the stop and start of technical adjustment interrupting the musical momentum. The song had a structure. It had solos in group sections and the specific architecture of a piece designed to be sung by many voices while remaining coherent, remaining one thing rather than a collection of individual performances assembled in proximity. Bruce learned the song in the room. He had heard it on the phone in the weeks before. Michael had played it for him briefly so that he would not arrive entirely unprepared. But learning a song for real happens in the body rather than in the ear, in the hands and the chest and the specific physical instrument of the voice. And that learning was happening now, in the context of the room, in the company of the other people singing it. He sang his line. He sang it the way he sang everything, with the weight of someone who understands that a line in a song is not a line to be delivered, but a truth to be expressed, that the difference between the two is audible and cannot be faked. He sang it once. He sang it again. Quincy listened, head slightly down, with the specific quality of concentration that distinguished his listening from ordinary listening, the listening of someone who is simultaneously hearing what is there and hearing what it needs to be, the gap between the two, and the means of closing it. He made a small adjustment. He moved on. Between takes, the room had the quality that rooms have when something significant is being made and everyone understands it. Not a solemn quality. There was laughter, conversations, the ordinary social exchanges of people thrown together in an unexpected configuration, finding with the ease of musicians that they have more in common than their genres and generations would suggest. But beneath it, the understanding that the night mattered. Bruce talked to Ray Charles for 20 minutes at one point, a conversation that nobody recorded and that Bruce has described only in fragments since, in the way people described conversations that mattered without wanting to reduce them to quotable exchanges. He talked to Quincy about the blend, about how his voice sat in the arrangement, about where he was most useful in the fabric of what was being built. He was where Michael had said he would be. He was the truth, the specific sound of working-class American sincerity in a room full of extraordinary voices, audible in the mix, part of what made the chorus what it became. The session ran through the night. People came and went. The logistics of 60 artists in a single space required a coordination that the production team managed with the competence of people who have been told that something is unprecedented and have decided that this is not a reason to fail. The music was recorded. The voices were recorded. The harmonies were built, one layer at a time, in the specific way that recorded music is built, which is from the inside out, rather than from the beginning to the end. At some point in the early morning, past 3, approaching 4, Bruce Springsteen stood in a recording studio in Hollywood with 44 other musicians and sang the chorus of We Are the World for the last time. The chorus moved through the room with the particular force of music that has been sung by many people who believe in it, that has accumulated in the singing of it the full weight of all the voices that have contributed to it. The room was quiet when it ended. The kind of quiet that follows the completion of something. Quincy Jones said, "That's it, we got it." We Are the World was released on March 7, 1985. It sold over 20 million copies. It raised more than $63 million for African famine relief. $63 million that were converted through the organizations that received them into food and medicine and the specific interventions that save lives in the context of a famine, that keep people alive who would otherwise not be alive. The number of people who were kept alive by what happened in that studio on the night of January 28, 1985, is not a number that can be calculated with precision. It is a number that exists somewhere in the space between the $63 million and the people who received what the $63 million bought, and it is large. Bruce Springsteen drove back to New Jersey. He did not talk about the session in the way that people talk about things they are proud of, with the self-presentation of someone who wants credit for a choice they made. He talked about it when people asked, which they did, and what he said was close to what Michael had said on the phone at 12:47 in the morning. There are people dying, and this was one way to help, and so he went. The phone had rung at 12:47 in the morning. He had picked it up. The voice had said, "Come to my house. I need your help." He said yes. He got out of bed. He went. Some things are as simple as that. A phone call in the dark, a yes before the sun came up, and a night in a studio in Hollywood that helped keep people alive on the other side of the world. That is what happened. That is why it matters. If this story moved you, please subscribe and leave a comment. Tell us about a time someone called you when you were needed and you chose to show up. Share this with someone who understands that the most important decisions are sometimes made in the dark, at 12:47 in the morning, with sleep still in your eyes. Hit the bell, because we have more stories from the moments when music became more than music.